Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, council members, city officials, and our streaming audience. I would like to welcome you to the October 10th City Council meeting. We have 12 items on our agenda this evening. We are meeting here in council chambers, open for public attendance and streaming live on YouTube. Moving forward, if you would, Ms. Moss, please continue with the roll call of members.
Greg Phillips.
Here.
Payne. Nickerson.
Here.
Farrow. Henderson.
Here.
Park. I'm sorry. Brown. Brown.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Anthony Phillips.
Here.
Prohl.
Here.
Do we have a motion to excuse Mr. Geringer from tonight's meeting? Ms. Henderson made the motion. Second. Mr. Phillips, roll call on the motion to excuse Mr. Geringer.
Greg
Where
Phillips.
is he? What's his excuse?
He's out of town.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Payne. Nickerson.
No.
Farrow. Henderson.
Yes.
Brown. Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion to excuse Ms. Payne from tonight's meeting?
And where is she?
Mr. Prohl, she is out of town. Mr. Prohl on the motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Phillips.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
No.
Farrow. Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Do we have a motion to excuse Mr. Farrow from tonight's meeting? Mr. Phillips on the motion. Do I have a second? Ms. Henderson, he is also out of town. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
No.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
At this time, if you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. The minutes of the previous meeting have been distributed for review. If we have nobody that has any additions or corrections for the minutes, do I have a motion to accept the minutes as they are? Ms. Henderson made the motion. A second. Mr. Phillips on the second. Mr. Anthony Phillips. The minutes have been accepted. Oh, roll call on the motion to accept the minutes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
The minutes have been accepted. We will now go to the reports of our committee, and we will begin with our Community Affairs Committee with Mr. Greg Phillips.
Thank you. On behalf of Community Affairs, we have nothing on the agenda and nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will move to our Human Resource Committee with Ms. Payne, and she did send me an update to give to you. Bear with me, I'm trying to find it here. She wanted to let you know, Human Resources has 2 items on the agenda tonight. Both are a third read and will be voted on. Item number 1 on the agenda is a resolution 22-106. The resolution is approving the 2023 health benefits proposal for the city employees. The city's healthcare committee met biweekly for a period of 4 months and weekly during the month of July to consider the city's various options and prepare recommendations with regard to the 2023 healthcare coverage for city employees. The Healthcare Committee, which included representatives from each union, the city, and city council, voted unanimously to recommend this resolution for approval by city council for the 2023 health insurance benefits for city employees. We ask for council's approval on this resolution. Item number 2 on the agenda is resolution 22-067. This is a resolution confirming the appointments of Dr. Richard Villarreal and Dr. Brandy Spaulding to the Ross County Health Board. The Health District Board, the Human Resource Committee, met numerous times to develop questions and interview these candidates. This resolution has gone through 2 reads and is ready to be voted on tonight. We ask for council's approval on this resolution. This concludes Human Resources report. Thank you. Next, our Development Committee with Ms. Nickerson.
Thank you. Development has nothing on the agenda tonight, therefore we have nothing to report.
Thank you. Next, our Finance Committee with Mr. Tony Phillips.
Thank you. Finance has just 1 item on the agenda, number 4, which is a second reading. It's an ordinance appropriating $4,000 for the use towards the purchase of a credit card machine and monthly credit card maintenance services charges for the remainder of 2022. And that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, our Parks and Rec Committee with Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, Ms. Preston. Tonight on our agenda, we have 3 items. Item number 7 is the May Drug-Free Clubs of America rally downtown, street closure. And due to the changes in this year's protocol for street closures, this item, as well as item number 11, do have emergency language. And then item number 11 is street closure for the annual JC's Halloween Parade. And item number 12 is street closure for the first annual Polar Plunge community event hosted by the Greenies nonprofit organization on New Year's Day. This item also has emergency language simply to allow for fundraising for the event. And then just a reminder, Tales of the Undead is currently playing at Sugarloaf Mountain Amphitheater, sometimes also known as Tecumseh. They have a haunted trail, escape room, tomahawk throwing, as well as a play. And that is all we have for tonight.
Thank you. Next is going to be myself with the Safety Service Committee. We have 5 items on the agenda tonight. We have number 3, a third reading and ordinance amending section 505.14 of the codified ordinances of the city of Chiillicothe as it pertains to livestock being kept or harbored within the corporation limits of the city of Chiillicothe. The plan for this tonight is we have an amendment for it. Teresa from the Law Director's Office realized that she had inadvertently had the auto numbering on when she was typing this legislation, so she found some numerical errors, so that was corrected. So we'll be asking for amendment to fix that. And then we will also be asking for a motion to commit this legislation back to committee. Number 5 is a first reading of an ordinance appropriating $70,000 for the purchase of a new boiler for the City of Chiillicothe Administration Building, declaring an emergency. Was that yours? Did I read that by accident? Okay. Number 6 is a first reading of ordinance appropriating $5,600 for the administration of fire department examinations and declaring an emergency. Number 8, an ordinance authorizing the Chiillicothe Municipal Court to apply for the Ohio Attorney General's Victims of Crime Voca Grant and State Victims Assistance Act grant to extend Chiillicothe Municipal Court Witness Assistance Program, accepting said grant if awarded and declaring an emergency. And number 9, a first reading of an ordinance appropriating $64,000 to fund the police department's lease of Axon body camera tasers and evidence storage services and declaring emergency. And that's a 3-year rotating lease. It's something that they go through every 3 years. I do want to comment on the criminal trespass legislation. So when when Law Director Villarreal and I talked about this last meeting, my intent was to table the legislation and then let it die on the table. So when we were talking, you know, I kind of thought maybe I was supposed to have a committee meeting prior to tabling that legislation. And so I'm going to, at the appropriate time, request to resend the votes on tabling the criminal trespass legislation. And then I am going to have a committee meeting next Monday and put it back on the agenda. And then my intent is to table the legislation and to let it die on the table, the first council meeting in November. So that is my intent with that legislation. That'll be all. Thank you. Next, our engineering committee and city services and transit committee with Mr. Farrow. He is absent.
On behalf of Mr. Farrow, I do have a couple items on the legislation. That would be number 5 and number 10. For number 5, it is at a first read. It's an ordinance appropriating $70,000 for the purchase of a new boiler for the City of Chiillicothe Administration Building, declaring an emergency. Obviously, with the weather already turning, we're definitely into Ohio, where you run your heat in the morning, your AC in the afternoon. Mr. Farrow would ask that we would add at the appropriate time to waive the 3-read rule on this piece of legislation so that we can get that passed and get work on that done. And then number 10 is an ordinance accepting and appropriating $150,000 from the 2021 Cdbg Formula Allocation Grant to assist in funding the Buckeye Street Sidewalk and Mary Lou Patton Park Facilities project. And at the appropriate time, Mr. Farrow has asked if I would also ask to add emergency language to that, as well as waive the 3-read rule, since this is the allocation grant and there is it's time sensitive. And so at the appropriate time, I will ask to add those and have those changes made. And that's all I have to report for Mr. Farrow. Thank you.
Finally, our utilities committee with Mr. Prohl.
Utilities has nothing on tonight's agenda, so my report will be very short, but we do have some items coming up, so keep on the lookout for those. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to welcome Mr. Jamie Brown to our council chambers. He is the new ward council. From there, we move to reports of our officials. Our mayor, Mr. Luke Feeney.
Thank you, President Pro Tem. It was suggested last week that my brief comments lacked brevity, so I'll be better this week. Few positive things to report. First off, you'll recall that we launched a new transit program this year, which is an on-demand system. We just passed 25,000 trips with that on-demand system. That was a January rollout, so pretty cool news there. And then this weekend, we will pass 5,000 trips for the trolley. So that was a little bit later rollout, but good stuff happening at transit. Following on that theme of good stuff, the police department just won a voting contest, and based on our size of city, won the contest for the best looking cruiser in Ohio. So they will go, I think it's to Columbus or Delaware this week to collect that prize, which does sound comical, but in an age of here I go, ending my brevity. In an age of recruitment and trying to attract folks, every little bit counts. And then finally, the online Engaged Chiillicothe program, which is launched and hopefully everybody has seen, now has over 250 registered users. It's a neat little platform, and we encourage everybody to hop on and give it a go. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mayor. We will move on to our auditor, Mrs. Betnagel.
I do not have anything on the agenda tonight, but we did have a tentative budget meeting scheduled for Wednesday, but we are going to push that back. I talked to the finance chair, and he agreed that it would be okay to do so. We're going to start those on Monday, October the 17th at 6 o'clock. That will give our departments a little bit more time to finish pulling together information. All those departments have met with the mayor and myself, so they are making great progress. So on Monday the 17th at 6 o'clock, we'll continue meeting. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. We will now move on to our Assistant Law Director, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. Not much to report tonight. I don't have anything to launch like the mayor does. I find that mayors are the ones who typically launch things in public meetings, but nothing to launch. But I did want to make myself available to anyone for commentary or questions about any pending legislation. Two items that are on the agenda tonight are particularly close to what I do on a day-to-day basis. The Voca Grant, which is a service that's offered to victim assistance in all of the court systems, is crucially important, I think, and I'd like for you to pay particular attention to that. And then also, I think it's item 9 on the agenda as it relates to law enforcement body cam. That is also a very important part of law enforcement, not only for the law enforcement direct side, but also the litigation side with the law director's office and the prosecutor's office and the like. It holds everybody accountable, and I think it's extremely important for the safety of not only our public service people, but also our public at large. And so I'd like for you to pay particular attention to that as well. With those two thoughts on those two important pieces of legislation, I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. And President Geringer had nothing to report as well. He would have been next. Moving on, we will move to audience participation. Council Rule 22 does limit each speaker to a 5-minute presentation and a total of 15 minutes per any single subject. If you get to the point where you are getting close to 1 minute left, I will try to indicate to you to summarize your presentation. Anyone who wishes to speak, we do need your name and address for our records when you first come up to the microphone.
Excuse me, Ms. Preston. I would like to move to suspend that rule 22 to allow people to speak more than their 15 minutes.
Do I have a second on that motion? Mr. Brown, second. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
No.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
No.
Anthony Phillips,
No.
Prohl,
Yes.
Motion passes.
Jason Link, 17 Mead Drive, back again. I'm going to try to, maybe now I don't have to be brief. I can take my full 5 minutes. Just want to be clear, since the last council meeting, I sent just two emails to several of the elected officials in the room, including Ms. Preston and also Ms. Villarreal, and I did not receive any responses on just those two emails. Last meeting, I was lambasted by some members of our elected officials, and I just want to be clear, those two emails did not receive any responses back. I did receive responses back from President Geringer and Clerk Moss, so thank you for those responses. I'm not sure why there's a fear of having an open conversation about this legislation. I've been here too many times to talk about chickens and goats and cows and pigs. All I've been trying to do in the emails that I've been sending and the times that I've come to speak to the whole council is share information that would be helpful for all of us to know, to take into consideration when we consider this legislation. Information like how there are only 17 5 to 10 acre plots in the city of Chiillicothe, and there's only 6 plots that are greater than 10 acres. Even though the current legislation that's being considered makes designations based on 5 to 10 and 10 acres, it seems those numbers are very arbitrary at best, and I might even say discriminatory towards the residents of Chiillicothe and the size of lots that we have in our city. Maybe it's different in other cities where legislation like this might have come from. Information like the area needed to safely and adequately house livestock animals. Nowhere will you find on the internet, will you find in any research that I've done or that Dr. Kate Wells, who's our local 4-H educator, has done, that says you need to have 5 to 10 acres to be able to have a cow. In fact, it's much less than that. It's an acre or less to be able to house any of the animals that we're talking about in this livestock legislation. Information like the concern that was brought up 2 weeks ago from another resident with chickens coming into her yard and pecking at the fence and getting in her garden. If we read the legislation that's currently on the books, as well as the legislation that's being considered, chickens have to be kept in an enclosed run. And so there's a safeguard in place for chickens not interfering in a neighbor's property, much like a dog interfering in a neighbor's property. The safeguard's already in the legislation. We don't have to worry about chickens coming onto somebody else's property. We just need to simply enforce the rules that are already in place. It's interesting that the law director's office was the one who found the alphabetical and numerical ordering issues. In fact, it was I who found the alphabetical and numerical ordering issues, and I brought them up 2 weeks ago, and you all still voted yes on that, which is just a little bit confounding to me, that you approved that second read 2 weeks ago, even though the legislation had 2 Section Bs and 2 Section B1s. Just hard for me to understand, agree or disagree with what's in the legislation, agree or disagree with what I'm proposing, but why you would pass legislation, why you would agree to legislation that has a simple alphabetical and numerical ordering issues. All I've asked for is to have an open conversation about this. All I've asked for is to have a committee meeting where the people who are involved on the ag side of things, on the livestock side of things, can actually be at the same table and talk about these. I have concern about other animals coming into my yard just the same as the lady 2 weeks ago had concern about that. Again, it's addressed in the legislation. I do not need to implore you all to not pass this legislation because it sounds like that's not going to take place tonight. What I would implore you, Ms. Preston, to please give us as much notice as possible when the committee meeting will take place so that the people who have interest in this, the people in the 4-H community, the people who have livestock in our community can be at that meeting and can offer comment, provide insight so that we can make the best legislation, not just for me, but for all the citizens here of Chiillicothe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reverend Link.
Hello, my name is Stacy Overlay. I live at 218 Woodside Drive. I've had a conversation with Mr. Phillips and you, Ms. Preston, regarding my concerns, and my concerns are simple. I live at the Deer Run condominiums. I've lived in the city of Chiillicothe for 20 plus years. In none of my wildest dreams would I have believed that 130 cattle could be placed in my backyard. I live 150 feet from the barn that's constructed behind our porch that we live at on 218 Woodside Drive. My wife and I and sister-in-law and my family has been members of 4-H. We've raised livestock, rabbits, and taken them to the fair. That's a lot different than having hogs, cows, and chickens in your backyard 150 feet from the porch that you've invested with, in and the, as a retirement home in the city that we've loved and lived in for many years. So that's basically the simple portion of my comments. There's also water flow issues, and I had expressed this at an what was the meeting that I went to? A zoning commission meeting, and it seems to me that the water flows have changed in that property. I talked to the Trotters earlier today. They own the 100+ acres that's right behind our property. And they said that, yes, they've noticed the similar water flow issues, said they had talked to the city engineer, and the city engineer had assured them there were problems that needed addressed. So I just want to bring that. I want to be on the record of saying that because, again, if there's livestock or something in my backyard and there's water flow issues, literally the water was feet, inches from my patio porch. And if it goes on my patio, it's got another 2 inches to go in my house. So we're talking about water and then the potential of having manure in my house. Not a good combination. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm on the senior fair board with a couple other fair board members back here. A couple items, questions and everything else we need to ask about this proposal is one, if it's a 4-H animal, it should be somewhere exempt. Granted, if you're putting a farm with 144 cows or whatever they can put, I can see putting some limitations of what you're doing. But like I said, an average lot size for a cow can be raised on a 100 by 100 foot lot. You're only housing it for 9 months. Same way with the, rabbits or 2 months, chickens or what, Jason? 8 weeks. I mean, where you guys are going deep into this, for some of these are 8-week projects for 4-H'ers. But the same aspect, we need to make sure when you change the wording to 4-H, it should say 4-H, FFA, Boy Scouts, or Girl Scouts, because they're all club members of 4-H. Okay, but they're not necessarily a 4-H member, but they can all show at the 4-H. Big thing is, same way with chickens and turkeys. There's wording in there for chickens, but not turkeys. So if we're going to do something, we need to add the verbiage in there for the turkeys. Obviously, the rabbit and chicken barn are my barns, but we are adding a turkey project more than likely this year. So that's just another verbiage we needed to add. I think that's all I got. Thank you, though.
We have to do it each time? Oh. There's no truth to the rumor that officially John Thacker, 990 Columbus Street, apartment 307, Chiillicothe. And I am a high proportion of those 5,000 who have rode the trolley, but I'm not all of them. So there are occasionally other people that use it. Two things, though. You're having a vote tonight on the Health District Board nominees, and I want to say that I support the nominees, and they gave me this heart, so I just want to carry that around to remind us that we need to be kind to one another when we're here. Everybody can get very emotional, but we're all neighbors. So the second question is, you have a first reading for the improvements that are done on Buckeye Street, as well as for improvements on Mary Lou Patton Park, which is my neighbor. I don't know if I would prefer talking to Allison, Mrs. Henderson, or Mr. Carmen. I don't know who would be in charge of what those improvements might entail at Mary Lou Patton Park. So I would just address that.
That would be Mr. Terrell Farrow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's invisible right at the moment.
Or the administration.
But I'm looking forward to whatever improvements are going to be there, for which you are eventually going to be voting on. So at some point they will have some mention of what that might entail. Is that correct? The sidewalk, I can kind of guess what it's going to be on Buckeye Street because there's a portion that's not the sidewalk right at the moment. Do I need to turn this off? Oh. I'm sorry, technology.
So that's a community development block grant. It's the application I think we put in last year. The appropriation is essentially something required through the funding source that the money get appropriated. It's unlikely that the projects are completed this year, but you're correct. Buckeye sidewalk project is a sidewalk, and the Mary Lou Patton project is actually a resurfacing and drainage project for the parking lot there. It's going to be a partnership with.
So they're going to get rid of that big lake that's there whenever.
We're going to try, yes, yep. And both the community development block grant program will target demographic areas, usually low income, or potentially connecting folks with resources, that sort of thing. The sidewalk on Western Avenue was partially funded by community development block grant, even though it wasn't in a census tract that it had to be. It was connecting people from different census tracts to health services, hospital, doctor's offices, grocery stores, that sort of thing.
And then one final thing. If we can, at some point, I think the need for this plexiglass wall is pretty much past. So whoever might have some pull in that. I don't know if any of you folks, do any of you work for the city? If one of you could perhaps find out how, if you want to, I'll bring a screwdriver to the next meeting and we can figure out how to take it apart. But unless there is some sort of reason that I don't know about. So thank you.
Oh, not yet, not yet. My name's the Reverend Terry Williams. I reside at 47.5 East Main Street. And since the rule has been suspended, I'm more than happy to speak about both the chickens and the criminal trespass. But I have to warn you, Mr. Thacker, I don't believe you're going to be able to come in here and do work. I think that might violate some collective bargaining agreement in the city. Don't want the unions to get upset. The issue with the chickens, I never thought I'd say this in public, but I speak as the 2001 Pike County Junior Fair King. Thank you to senior fair board members who are here. 4-H is a key, essential part of a lot of our youth development in this community and in this city. And there are some concerns, particularly around the strictness of the 4-H exemption that was listed. Namely, that the way that the 4-H exemption currently reads, it only exempts animals that are at the physical location of the home of the person who takes the project. And unfortunately, there are many individuals throughout the city who choose to take projects that they simply don't have the physical space to care for those animals properly. Now, there are some exemptions that can be made through the clubs and through other processes where they're able to have a friend or a neighbor or someone up the street that is able to care, for the physical space, but they come and care for the animal. I just lift that up as it goes back to further consideration in committee. And I really hope that it goes through good scrutiny in committee. The numbering is not the least of the worries with that legislation, particularly given the concerns that Mr. Overley brought. That there are real concerns with a few places in the city that this might open up a lot of problems for existing homeowners. Now, to the criminal trespass legislation, I'm very glad to hear that you're going to properly go back and take care of that legislation. I did send a communication to you as council members to communicate the struggle that I had when I sat here at the last meeting and saw that you took an action on committed legislation. Now, I know not everybody here is a parliamentarian, but it's important to remember that when you make a motion to commit an item, you're actually referring it to a committee of jurisdiction. So you're sending that item to a committee, and that committee now has jurisdiction over that item. Council does not have the authority to vote on items that are in front of your committees unless council exercises what's called a discharge petition. That is a special motion that says we're going to yank back that item from committee and put it onto the council agenda. And then, of course, you would have to put it onto the council agenda as an Arabic numeral. You'd have to go through the notice requirements and the waiving of the 3-day receipt rule and all that process. But it's really important stuff to know that your committees are where that work is supposed to be done. So when you refer something back to committee, what you're saying is the committee should be the one tasked with taking that legislation and fixing it. This particular legislation doesn't ever have to come back to council. If your committee, the Safety Services Committee, that has jurisdiction over that legislation, would decide to just vote it down, it doesn't ever have to return to council. You don't have to put it back on the agenda. You don't have to lay it on the table. You don't have to wait a whole nother couple of meetings. You don't have to stretch it all the way to November. We've dealt with this legislation now since June, and I think it's really important for us to see this legislation laid down. The only other concern I have is related to a communication that I received as a part of a public records request. This communication is an email, Ms. Preston, between yourself and it looks like the law director and the president of council. This communication that's dated on September 22nd at about 8 in the morning indicates the following. These are your words, Ms. Preston. I'm going to do what I said and pull back the legislation since it is so tainted now, but I'm going to explore other ideas that I feel are best for the safety and security of the city, along with your signage and Ohio Revised Code trespass ideas. Now, just to reference, those ORC references were references from the law director's office that she indicated she thinks there are ways to charge people who are sleeping overnight in the park based upon existing law. I just want to point out that the communications that council has received from the National Homelessness Law Center, as well as the ACLU, as well as all of us in this place who've been hollering about this for months, still stand even with that ORC language. You cannot imprison people for sleeping in the park if we don't provide them some kind of alternative shelter. Now, one thing that I'm really excited about in this statement says that we're going to go forward with what you believe is best for the safety and security of the city. And you also reference another municipality, Wadsworth, Ohio. I took a look at Wadsworth. Wadsworth is a great comparison. It's the same size as us. It did implement this very legislation. However, Wadsworth has no less than nine separate facilities to house homeless persons, to provide shelter. We have qualified under federal law, qualified for this calculation, one, and it holds 53 individuals. Sending this back to committee and letting it die there, or bringing it back here and killing it in November, whatever you do with that legislation that gets it gone, does nothing for individuals who need shelter now. We need you to be making solutions for people in this city who lack shelter because winter is coming and it's damn cold. Thank you.
It's on? Okay. Me and technology don't get along. I'm Linda Hoover, and I live at 319 Rennick. And I would just like to continue with what Terry was saying. The most immediate need that we have in this town right now is emergency shelter. The current shelter we have is only open to receive people in the evening. Ideally, a shelter to help ease the problem that we have would be open around the clock. That way people who are homeless, who can get jobs to work second and third shift jobs, because having employment
being able to work and earn money is one of the surefire ways to dig people out of homelessness if they've got some kind of income. Plus, you could have services come to them instead of having them wander all over the town, going to their counseling or to their mandatory meetings or whatever it is that they have. Bring it to them. That way you don't have them out wandering around and loitering and, you know, and in the park and wherever. We need to do a better job of this. And I can guarantee you one thing, and if you've realized it or not, we are getting not just statewide attention on this issue, we're getting national attention on this issue. I can guarantee it. And it's going to continue. And we have a moment in time right now to do the right thing, to come to some kind of a humane solution that will serve the best of everybody, serve the best of this town. I understand that you, Ms. Preston, and I think you, Ms. Henderson, are going to be attending the COC meetings. I welcome that. This is where you need to be, because you need to be hearing it from both sides. And we need to start a different way of talking about the people in our town who are experiencing homelessness. Give them some sort of sense of dignity. They deserve the respect that every one of us in this town does. They deserve the same respect that you would give to a family member who was experiencing an episode of a housing crisis. That's all that we're asking. Are we up in arms about it? You better believe it. But let me tell you something. You can do better. I know each and every one of you sitting in here can do better than you've done. I know that there's money out there to do it. Let's stop favoring all of these big dollars that are coming in from out of the city to fund hospitality housing and focus on single family housing. We have to do a better job. And you all have got it in you to come together, join with the COC, work with other agencies, you know, Community Action, Walnut Street Methodist, First Cornerstone of Change. Everybody has an idea. Let's bring all of those ideas to the table and come up with the best solution for this town. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to old business. Does anyone have old business they would like to bring up this evening? I think this is where I want to ask for a motion to rescind the votes on the tabled legislation for criminal trespass. Do I make the motion? Okay, I'm making the motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second by Ms. Nickerson. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. And then I would also like to make a motion to accept the amendments to the livestock legislation, the incorrect numbering that Teresa found due to Mr. Reverend Dr. Link's suggestion. Do I have a second? Mr. Phillips, Greg Phillips. Roll call on the motion.
Prohl,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes. I would also like to make a motion to commit this legislation back to committee.
Second.
Ms. Nickerson, second. Roll call on the motion.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes. Not seeing any participation, or do you have any correspondence from the clerk? Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Preston. I do have a piece of correspondence from Reverend Terry Williams. I'm going to read it aloud now. Members and Clerk Moss, I write to you today distressed at the improper disposition of business during the September 26, 2022 regular meeting of the Council of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio. During that meeting, a motion was heard to lay upon the table legislation which was listed as committed legislation at the end of the agenda for that evening's meeting. Namely, I'm concerned with the motion made referencing an ordinance amending section 541.05, criminal trespass of the codified ordinances of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio, which was listed as Roman numeral 1 after the agenda items of the September 26 meeting. That ordinance had, by action of council, been previously referred to the Safety Services Committee and had not been placed back on council's agenda for action. From the rules of council, we see that committed legislation is not a part of council's formal agenda, but rather is only listed at the end of the current agenda for reference purposes only. Reference Rule 13E3. Matters which are committed for further study are not pending matters before council. Their listing for reference purposes only at the end of council agendas does not mean they're items that can be properly acted upon by council without intervening processes and motions. Once that legislation was committed, that is referred to the Safety Services Committee. It no longer held pending status in full council and therefore was not subject to council action. According to Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised 12th edition, the only method by which council can remove business from the committed, that is referred, stage of committee jurisdiction is to execute a motion to discharge to the committee. 36.1 is by means of the motion to discharge a committee from further consideration of a question or subject. The Assembly can take the matter out of a committee's hands after referring it to the committee and before the committee has made a final report on it, and the Assembly itself can consider it. 36.2, so long as a question is in the hands of a committee, the Assembly cannot consider another motion involving practically the same question. Further, notice requirements under Ohio's Open Meetings Act, ORC 121.22, make it clear that council cannot be said to have fulfilled notice requirements for action on an item that is not pending before the body without either listing the item as an Arabic numeral item for action on its agenda or by taking other preceding action as may be permitted under the rules of the Assembly, such as a motion to discharge the committee. Allowing such a motion as was improperly and illegally made during the September 26, 2022 regular meeting concerning the criminal trespass legislation would be tantamount to destroying the committee process and rendering null all notice requirements that constrain council, both those requirements council has for itself and those that have been set for council by state law. Council is, by design, constrained in its power for the benefit of the people of the city. The rules and laws that govern council's behavior exist to ensure that people who wield power on behalf of our city do so in ways which are fair, ethical, and decently ordered so as to promote public participation and confidence in the legislative process. It is clear that the criminal trespass legislation was not properly before council as a pending item on September 26, 2022, that the motion to lay upon the table was illegally made, and that the legislation in question is undeniably still properly under the jurisdiction of the Safety Services Committee. Until such time as that legislation is either reported back to council as a pending agenda item or is the subject of a motion to discharge the committee, it must be listed at the end of the agenda as committed legislation under Rule 13 of the Rules of Council. I, more than anyone, want to see that legislation gone from council's agenda. All the same, it must be disposed of properly, and the method you've chosen in your last meeting is anything but proper. Additionally, the harmful precedent that ignoring such a grievous breach of parliamentary process would no doubt create is worth the fight to make this right. I implore you to do the right thing, recognize your error in parliamentary process, and dispose of this legislation legally to avoid future entanglements and undesirable outcomes for our city. Sincerely, Reverend Terry Williams.
Next, we have new business. Does anyone have any new business they would like to bring up? We will now move on to our legislation. We have 12 items on our agenda this evening, and Ms. Moss, whenever you are ready, we will start with item number 1.
Thank you, Ms. Preston. Item number 1 is the third reading of a resolution approving the 2023 health insurance benefits proposal for city employees.
Roll call on the ordinance. Roll call on the resolution.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Abstain.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Brown. Sorry.
Yes.
Motion passes. Resolution passes. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is a third reading of a resolution confirming the appointments of Dr. Richard Villarreal and Dr. Brandy Spaulding to the Ross County Health District Board.
Roll call on the resolution.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Number 3 is now committed legislation. Number 4.
Item number 4 is a second reading of an ordinance appropriating $4,000 for the use toward the purchase of a credit card machine and monthly credit card machine service charges for the remainder of 2022.
That'll move on to the next meeting. Number 5.
Item number 5 is the first reading of an ordinance appropriating $70,000 for the purchase of a new boiler for the City of Chiillicothe Administration Building and declaring an emergency.
Ms. Preston, I would like to ask that we waive the 3-read rule on this.
I'll second that.
Roll call on the motion.
Prohl,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes. Or ordinance passes. Roll call on the ordinance, sorry.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Number 6.
Item number 6 is the first reading of an ordinance appropriating $5,600 for the administration of fire department examinations and declaring an emergency.
And I would like to request at this time to waive the 3-read. Greg Phillips on a second. Roll call on the ordinance. Correction, roll call on the motion.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Roll call on the ordinance. Motion passes. Roll call on the ordinance.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Number 7.
Item number 7 is the first reading of a resolution expressing cooperation and granting use of a certain portion of Paint Street for the MAID drug-free rally and declaring an emergency.
That moves on to the next meeting. Okay. Number 8.
Item number 8 is the first reading of an ordinance authorizing the Chiillicothe Municipal Court to apply for the Ohio Attorney General's Victims of Crime Act Voca Grant and the State Victims Assistance Act SVAA grant to extend the Chiillicothe Municipal Court Victim Witness Assistance Program, accepting said grants if awarded and declaring an emergency.
And at this time, I would like to request that council waive the 3-read rule. I have a second. Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
The motion has passed. Roll call on the legislation.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes,
Prohl.
Yes.
and the ordinance is passed. Number 9.
Madam President, was there a suggestion of emergency language on item 7 on the agenda? I don't think we did that. Did we? Okay. I just want to make sure that it's not time sensitive. I'm not sure about that. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Number 9.
Item number 9 is the first reading of an ordinance appropriating $64,000 to fund the police department's lease of Axon body cameras and tasers and evidence storage services and declaring an emergency.
At this time, I would like to request that council waive the 3-read rule on this item. Mr. Phillips, Greg Phillips, second. Roll call on the motion.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes,
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
roll call on the ordinance.
Henderson,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes,
Brown,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
and the ordinance has passed. Number 10.
Item number 10 is the first reading of an ordinance accepting and appropriating $150,000 from the 2021 Cdbg Formula Allocation Grant to assist in funding the Buckeye Street Sidewalk and Mary Lou Patton Park Facilities Project.
Miss Preston, I would like to have emergency designation added to this. And then I will also request to waive the 3-read rule, but those will be separate, obviously. So I think first we need to add emergency language to this bill per Mr. Farrow's request because it's time sensitive.
Do I have a second on that motion? Mr. Brown, second on the motion. Roll call on the motion.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes,
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Miss Preston, I would now like to waive the 3-read rule for item number 10.
do I have a
Thank you.
second? Ms. Henderson, second. Roll call on the motion.
Prohl,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes,
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
motion passes.
Anthony Phillips, sorry.
Yes.
Roll call on the legislation.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes,
Prohl.
Yes.
legislation passes. Number 11.
Item number 11 is the first reading of a resolution granting use of Yaktangi Park and certain city streets for the annual JC's Halloween Parade on Saturday, October 29th, 2022, and declaring an emergency.
That'll move on to the next meeting. Number 12.
Item number 12 is the first reading of a resolution expressing cooperation and granting use of a certain portion of Paint Street to the Greenies nonprofit organization for its Polar Plunge community event and declaring an emergency.
And that'll move on to the next meeting. Is there anything else that needs to be added or brought up at this time? If not, do I have a motion for adjournment of the meeting? I have a motion by Ms. Henderson, a second by Ms. Nickerson. Meeting is adjourned. Oh, sorry. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes,
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
we are adjourned. Have a wonderful evening.